The Art of Strategy by Avinash K. Dixit. Barry J. Nailbuff. 10 Tales of Strategy. The solutions of different problems or hurdles require strategy and creative thoughts. Designing a game strategy needs a creative mindset. Pick a number. For instance, if you need to design a guessing game for a number to be picked in between 1 to 100, then you have to set a thoughtful strategy to make it trickier for the players. Winning by losing, the ability to anticipate what would happen in the game will help you play strategically. The hot hand strategy to warm up the game or play strategically is the major factor to get consecutive successes. To lead or not to lead. To be successful in your goals, you can use two different perspectives. First one is to simply imitate by not thinking strategically about the outcomes. The second one is to use risky strategies and wait long enough until the success or failure of the approach is learned before proceeding further. Here I stand. The power of intransigence is what that enables you to stick to your decisions. Will probably bring the worst outcomes of your decision initially, but in long run, you will have positive outcomes. Thinning strategically, losing extra pounds within a required time period is a daunting task. However, being strategic in your endeavors or a set diet planning will enable you to accomplish your task. Buffett's Dilemma. This dilemma is the most popular and troubling game in the game theory. According to the Buffett's or prisoner's dilemma, if each individual acts or performs in his or her own self-interest, each of them experiences the worst outcome. Mix your plays. The randomized strategy also has its importance in the game theory. It is not too difficult to go randomly in a single play game, but if the game is repeated, there is a need to go with a trickier approach. Never give a sucker an even bet. Sucker bet is a gambling wager in which the expected return is lower than the wager. Game theory can be dangerous to your health. Not always game theory gives us a positive outcome in the gameplay. Sometimes, we need to see the negative aspects like how they can be dangerous for us and also other players' perspective apart from us. We can implement these effective strategies in every aspect of our lives, but with a changed approach, we may get a clear principle towards our goal achievements. Games solvable by backward reasoning. According to the theme of comic strip, Peanuts, our past actions could give us a good idea about our character and our past notorious behavior. There are two types of strategic interactions. The first one is sequential and the second one is simultaneous. In sequential interaction, players make alternating moves. In the simultaneous interaction, players involved tend to act at the same time, ignoring the current actions of other players. In an important decision-making with an alternative, you need to identify your initial decision to calculate your best choice. You should abstain from judging other players harshly in the game because you should realize the fact that it takes time and experience to be able to learn how to play even the simplest of the games. To play strategic games, like chess in relation to different types of sports games, it is difficult for players on both sides to foresee their opponent's reaction to their move. In chess, the backward reasoning is considered as the most appropriate way to analyze the perspective of your opponent as well as yours through forward and backward reasoning, but it may not be viable all the time, and it is difficult to predict the eventual outcome in contrast. Prisoner's dilemma and how to resolve them. As per the concept of prisoner's dilemma, people have personal incentives to do something which eventually leads to a bad result for everyone when people do what their personal interest dictates. Who was the pioneer of the game theory? It was Al Tucker, who invented the prisoner's dilemma reflecting the game theory. When you have alternatives in terms of setting your ideal prices, it does not really matter, because it will not make any difference to your outcome. When you have this simultaneous move game in place, no matter what other players' move might be, it is worth it, and this property is called dominant strategy by game theorists. The prisoner's dilemma is very special as it allows not just one but both players to have a dominant strategy. players coming across this dilemma can agree to make joint agreements to avoid it. Moreover, punishment is not a viable solution to resolve prisoners' dilemmas, nor is cheating, as it could prove to be disastrous for relationships. When people think of punishing other players, they tend to perceive it as tit for tat. The tit for tat phenomenon embodies four principles: clarity, niceness, provocability and forgiveness, as it doesn't give enough time to your opponent to know your intentions. The question is how to achieve successful cooperation? And this issue must be addressed in the right manner. Tragedies of the common refer to the fact that each person stands to benefit by having more of his share. To resolve dilemmas, the important thing is to have clear rules to help identify members of the group, players having the right to use the resources and following the enforced systems after the rules are being laid down. A beautiful equilibrium. Coordination is one of the best aspects of getting things done in a highly effective way, but when done with no coordination, one may not expect any significant success. The beautiful equilibrium of John Nash was designed to enable theoretical way to square those circles of thinking to identify the choices of other people in games of strategy. When it comes to making choices among two friends regarding an activity, it is important for both of them to have a similar frame of mind, resulting in being aware of each other's choice to be prominent. When the expectations of players converge, it is called a focal point, however it might not be present in some games. To achieve Nash equilibria for a game, you can take the help of computers. There are software packages that can help players find the focal point by solving complex graphs where Nash equilibrium lie without too much of sweating. If one strategy, namely A, being worse than another, namely B, a player will not opt for A, helping the other player not considering a strategy being the best response to only A. There are two distinctive ways to test things out: observation and experimentation. Observation takes place out in the real world, whereas experimentation takes place in laboratories where things are artificially designed. People experimenting in labs can easily introduce certain rules for others to comply with as a way to keep things favorable. Contrary to that, things in the real world are entirely different from laboratory settings. They are not artificial and the subjects are usually students. They have to make sure that they understand the rules of the game properly to play well. They are more experienced in terms of playing games than those restricted to laboratory-based experimentations. They are perfect to meet the requirements of Nash equilibrium. Choice and chance. The key to playing any game is to remain hidden in your intentions for your opponents. You have to mix things up in order to become unpredictable, the key to surviving business or even sports games, to safeguard your long-term interests. Theories are made to materialize things, and the only way things can be materialized is by taking practical measures. When it comes to deceiving the opponents, physical moves are of utmost importance. Mixing things up on a real field and on a laboratory are two sides of the same coin. In labs, subjects are not professionals like the ones in soccer field. They do not have higher stakes and have nothing to lose if they are not able to use deceptive skills to randomize their moves. In the real soccer field, professionals have higher stakes. Their prestige and fame can be compromised if they are not able to use their deceptive skills effectively. Randomization is the key to success in soccer and tennis. The purpose of randomizing moves is to not allow your opponent to guess your intention. In the world of sports, things are entirely different as compared to the matters of business and wars, and sometimes, your best mix can get you a poor outcome. In sports, you can afford to take chances by experimenting different things, but in matters of business and war, you cannot afford to drastically act randomly, as it can have a disastrous impact on the eventual outcome if things do not go as planned. Strategic moves. Sometimes our planning and strategic moves are not a guarantee for your success. They can sometimes get you disastrous results. You must fulfill your commitments at any cost by not giving any sort of lame excuses. Threats and promises are both complex conditional moves. A threat is a way to warn others if they fail to comply with the rules that you have set for them to follow, whereas promise is a commitment which rewards others if they follow the rules you have set for them to follow. Deterrence is referred to as when you deliberately stop others from doing something that they would normally do. Whereas, compellence is forcing others to do something that they would not do normally. Warning and assurance do not require any rule in relation to make you do things that you would not do under normal circumstance. They play more of an informational role to avoid potential disastrous consequences. There are two important considerations before you decide your course of action. The first one is the cost, and the other in relation to threats and promises is to identify whether the purpose is deterrence or compellence. The two of them are entirely different from each other in terms of time dimensions. Compellence has a deadline, whereas deterrence does not have it. Elements of clarity, certainty, large threats and brinkmanship play pivotal role in determining relation between threats and promises. Making strategies credible. When you are playing a game, you must abstain from going for threats, promises and commitments. You can practice brinkmanship comprising 8 categories, and they are based on 3 principles. The first principle is to alter the payoffs of the game. You need to follow through with the commitments you have made by turning a threat into a warning and a promise into an assurance. There are 2 broad classes of tactics through which this can be achieved, and they are as following: write contracts to back up your resolve. Establish and use a reputation. These tactics are likely to be more costly when it comes to breaking the commitment than to keep it. There are 3 varying possibilities: cut off communication, burn bridges behind you, leave the outcome beyond your control, or even to chance. Second principle: if there is a large commitment and it can be broken down into small ones, then the gain from breaking a small one may be more than offset by the loss of the remaining contract. Therefore, we have, move in small steps. The third principle is to have others to help you stay committed. A team may be hired to achieve credibility than an individual. Develop credibility through teamwork. Employ mandated agents. Interpreting and manipulating information. We often tend to avoid telling things like they are because oftentimes, doing so can serve against our personal interests and personal desires in accordance with the game they opt to play, so there might be question marks over credibility of such sources. When it comes to interpreting the intentions of others' players observe what action other players are taking. Concealing actions can avoid such information leakage. Hiring people for a particular job requires screening, which can be very challenging for you. In order to solve this riddle, you can use a screening device helping you identify the highly talented individuals among different candidates. Everything you opt to do sends a signal, even if you are not sending it consciously. One of the best ways to signal the kind or the type of person you are is to simply not signal it. For an object or belonging, then the best indicator to judge is its prevailing condition, whether it has been kept well or not. When you are playing a game and you mix up your moves or strategies, you cannot fool your rival every time, as he can identify a pattern you are using to deceive him. There are different types of goods and services which some people are willing to avail right away by paying a high price, and at the same time. A book is just one such example in relation to price determination by screening, as there are several other factors involved that people are willing to avail right away by paying a high price, and at the same time, there are also people who are patient enough for the prices to go down before they make a purchase. Cooperation and coordination. The success of people is either in absolute or relative performance. When there is a winner, there is a loser as well. The person who eventually wins actually lowers the positions of others. Shortest routes may not be the quickest as most people prefer them, and it can take same time to travel as the long routes. This very outcome is their equilibrium of the game. One should recognize early in relation to the potential for future lock-in. When a typing machine was invented, there was no standard as to how the letters could be arranged, and to make it simpler for typists, QWERTY keyboard was invented, but later DSK typing format were invented, which was pretty difficult to people who were already accustomed to using QWERTY to adapt the change. The important lesson to learn from game theory is that if one of the options have a great start, superior technology alternatives can never develop. In order to avoid becoming an odd man out, sometimes you are dependent on others and you have to follow them. Different people have different perceptions and preferences, but when it comes to living in a particular area, most of them prefer having a racial mix, as they are not comfortable living in an area dominated by a particular race in terms of numbers. For instance, whites will not prefer a place where black population is dominant and vice versa. It can be lonely at the top, and only coordinated strategy by looking ahead and reasoning backward approach can work. Auctions, biddings and context. Auction is about bidding for the lowest price. To get some idea of how auctions work, let us have a brief look at some of the auction types. English auction: you keep bidding as long as the price exceeds your value, and then eventually you drop out. Japanese auction: it continues via the clock, where all bidders keep their hands raised to remain active, but once you lower your hand, you drop out. This process continues till one bidder remains. Victory auction: you do not bid directly, but through a proxy bid. It is considered remarkable as all the bidders have a dominant strategy, and, since the inception of internet, it has become standard for online auctions, where the best example is eBay. There are other types of auctions as well, including snipping, sealed bid auctions, and Dutch auctions. When playing a game theory, you should act like a consequentialist, and you need to look ahead and determine the consequences of future actions. The preemption game states that if you fire too early, missing the target, it will give your rival in bidding a chance to hit with assurance. However, if you keep waiting for too long, you are going to end up dying without even a single shot fired. War of attrition is opposite to preemption game. In war of attrition, your main objective is to outlast your rival, contrary to preemption game, where you see who jumps in first. Bargaining. The rift between the management and union is quite common in most of the organizations. A union may have a particular demand, such as increasing the wages or something which organization might not agree upon. When an agreement has not reached between the union members and the management, it is in the best interest for both parties to negotiate and measure the pie correctly in this process. The size of the pie is measured when two parties to reach an agreement in accordance with how much value is created. Strikes by union members at different organizations are never fruitful for the management. It hurts them financially as well as socially, resulting in damaged reputation, having negative implications in the long run. When an old contract is about to finish, the management should renew it sooner as to avoid any conflict, otherwise union can go for a strike. If it takes place, it is damaging for both parties, the firm as well as the union. It paves way for brinkmanship for the union. When bargaining takes place between the union and the management, it is not just restricted to one aspect, and it can be multidimensional. There is a solution, and that is, instead of having traditional strikes, parties facing conflicts can settle for a virtual strike, where employees or workers keep working as they usually do, and at the same time, a firm also keeps producing the goods as usual, but, when a virtual strike takes place, both sides do not get paid. Voting. In a genuine democratic government, people have the right to choose their leader, and two candidates run for the elections in this setup, where one is elected according to preference of majority of people. Naive voting. One of the most common election systems is majority voting, in which a particular candidate wins majority of the votes against his rival. Condorcet's method. As per this method, when three candidates are competing in an election, it is best to have each pair of candidates compete in pairs. According to US judicial system, the first step to take is to determine the defendant as innocent or guilty. Once a defendant is found guilty, he is sentenced. It may seem a very simple step or procedure, but such a decision could mean the difference between life and death, or a long-term conviction. The median voter theorem, it states that a majority rule voting system will select the outcome most preferred by the median voter. However, this solution does not work successfully if voters' preferences are not one-dimensional. Things are likely to get more complicated when the position of a candidate can no more be ordered along a single dimension. But if there are three issues that are of significance, then three-dimensional space should be considered for the candidates. The experts of game theory, Stephen Brams and Peter Fishburne, have urged approval voting, enabling voters to be truthful when voting without considering electability. In approval voting, a voter can vote for as many candidates as he wishes to. One of the most common problems is to distort one's preferences to gain incentive and make the best of it. Incentives. Incentives are of utmost importance for an economy to thrive. The market economy system is far more effective because it offers attractive financial and fringe benefits. In a market economics system, people have motivation to thrive because they are rewarded for their good performances. The best option you have is to base the compensation of your employee on the success of the project. It is best to relate the income of an employee with the eventual outcome of the project. Non-linear payment schemes have lots of drawbacks, and they have to be designed properly or else they can become ineffective in the long run. There are two key aspects of incentive payment scheme, and they are the average payment to the worker and the spread of payments in good versus bad outcomes. Apart from single tasks such as proofreading books, incentive schemes also have multi-dimensional usage in each context. If an employee has a job which is likely to last for several years, then he has an incentive in form of promotions to stay in an organization. If you are planning to hire an employee to work for you, you must consider giving him sufficient salary or incentive as to make him work for you for several years, and retaining him is very important. It can be tough, but it will reap rewards in the longer run. What happens when different employees perform a single task? Some employees are lucky and talented, whereas some could be just average. Here, incentive schemes can be designed according to competition or relative performance. Some organizations work under a hierarchy, and it is responsibility of every line manager to look after their subordinates in every manner. Whereas some work under multiple owners, which leads to employee answerable to lots of bosses. In case if the interests of multiple owners are opposed, this practice will lead to weakness of incentives as a whole. If you hire any employee to work on a project, you need to determine whether the employee is putting in routine efforts or giving his best shot. If the project is successful, he has to do a lot of hard work, and therefore, he should be compensated accordingly. However, if the project is unsuccessful, you can decline to compensate him. What we learned. What was the core message that we got from this book? The solutions to different problems or hurdles require strategy and creative thoughts. Designing a game strategy needs a creative mindset. Sometimes it is important to acknowledge the perspective of others. Abstain from judging other players harshly, as it takes time and experience to be able to learn how to play even the simplest of the games. When it comes to playing highly complex games, backward reasoning is the most appropriate way of making analysis to predict the possible outcome of the game. Coordination is one of the best aspects of getting things done in a highly effective way, but when done with no coordination, one may not expect any significant success. You should play your game like a stealth which remains undetected by other rivals. If you become guessable by your opponents or players playing against you, they will use your weakness against you for their benefit.